Switch: How to Change Things When Change is Hard by Chip Heath and Dan Heath. Picture this. You're stepping into the boardroom of a huge manufacturing company. The tension is almost palpable. A young manager named John Stegner is about to pitch an idea that could save the company $1 billion. But the senior executives? They're leaning back in their chairs, arms crossed, radiating skepticism. They've sat through 1,000 cost-cutting proposals before. Stegner knows that spreadsheets and charts won't cut it. He knows he can't just appeal to their logical minds. He needs to do something completely different. So instead of firing up a PowerPoint presentation, he asks the executives to gather around the enormous, polished conference table. And there, piled high in the center of the room, is a mountain of gloves. Hundreds of them, 424 different kinds to be exact. Each glove has a little price tag attached. The executives stare, confused at first. Then they start walking around the table. They pick up 2 gloves that look identical. One is marked $3.22. The other, $10.55. They realize the company is buying 424 different types of work gloves from dozens of different suppliers at wildly different prices. The room falls silent. The executives, who are rarely at a loss for words, just stand there with their mouths gaping. In that moment, something shifted. It wasn't an analysis, it wasn't a debate. It was a feeling of, this is crazy, we have to fix this. And that single visceral moment kicked off a change that saved the company hundreds of millions of dollars. That story, my friend, holds a powerful secret. It's a secret about why some changes catch fire and transform organizations, while others fizzle out before they even begin. Today, we're going to explore a landmark book that unpacks this secret. It's called Switch: How to Change Things When Change is Hard, by 2 brilliant brothers, Chip and Dan Heath. This isn't just a business book. It's a guide to the human mind. It has sold millions of copies and has become a go-to manual for leaders, parents, and anyone trying to make a difference in the world. And my promise to you is this: by the end of our time together, you'll understand the simple, 3-part framework that governs all successful change. You'll understand the hidden battle that's happening inside your own mind every single day, and you'll walk away with a toolkit of powerful strategies to win that battle, to change your habits, to influence your friends, and to lead the change you want to see in the world. So let's begin. Have you ever set your alarm for 5:45 in the morning, absolutely determined to get up, go for a run, and start your day right? Your rational self, the planner, is totally on board. But then, when that alarm goes off in the cold, dark morning, another part of you, the part that's warm and cozy under the covers, wants nothing more than a few more minutes of sleep. And more often than not, that cozy part wins. Or how about this? You start a new diet, full of conviction. You clear the pantry of all the junk food, because your rational side knows that when a craving hits, you won't have the self-control to resist. What's happening in these moments? The Heath brothers argue that our brain isn't of one mind. In fact, they say we are all a little bit schizophrenic. They introduce a powerful metaphor, borrowed from the psychologist Jonathan Haidt, that is the key to understanding all human behavior. Imagine that you have within you an elephant and a rider. The rider is your rational side. It's the planner, the thinker, the part of you that looks to the future and knows you should eat a salad instead of a pizza. The rider holds the reins and seems to be in charge. But beneath the rider is the elephant. The elephant is your emotional, instinctive side. It's the part of you that feels pleasure and pain, the part that wants that extra slice of pizza right now. The elephant is powerful, a 6-ton beast. And here's the crucial part. If the rider and the elephant ever disagree on which way to go, the rider is going to lose. He's completely overmatched. This is why we overeat, procrastinate, skip the gym, or stay up too late scrolling through our phones. Our rider knows what we should do, but our elephant wants what it wants. And willpower? That's just the rider trying to yank on the reins. He can do it for a little while, but eventually he gets exhausted. In fact, psychologists have proven that self-control is an inexhaustible resource, like a muscle that gets tired. In one famous study, researchers brought hungry college students into a room that smelled of freshly baked chocolate chip cookies. On a table were two bowls, one with cookies and chocolates, the other with radishes. Half the students were told to eat the cookies. The other half were told to eat the radishes and resist the cookies. Now that took a lot of willpower for the radish eaters. Afterward, both groups were given a puzzle to solve, a puzzle that was secretly unsolvable. The researchers wanted to see how long they would persist. The cookie eaters, whose willpower was fresh, worked on the puzzle for an average of 19 minutes. But the radish eaters? They gave up after only 8 minutes. They had used up all their self-control resisting the cookies, so when their elephant got frustrated with the puzzle, their rider had no strength left to fight back. This leads to the first surprise about change. What looks like laziness is often exhaustion. When people fail to change, it's not because they're lazy or resistant. It's because they've worn themselves out. Their rider is tired. So if you want to make a change, you can't just rely on willpower. You can't just talk to the rider. You have to appeal to both the rider and the elephant. And you have to make the journey easy for them to travel. This gives us the simple three-part framework from Switch. First, direct the rider. Give your rational brain a clear, crystal clear direction. Second, motivate the elephant. Engage your emotional side so it wants to go on the journey. And third, shape the path. Make the environment around you supportive of the change you want to make. Let's break that down, because inside each of these 3 steps are some of the most powerful strategies for change ever discovered. Part 1. Direct the rider. The rider is our planner and thinker, but he has a terrible weakness: analysis paralysis. When faced with too many options or an ambiguous goal, the rider will spin his wheels forever, analyzing the problem from every angle, but never actually making a move. Think about a goal like eat healthier. It's a noble goal, but what does it actually mean? Should you eat less meat, more grains, cut out carbs, take vitamins? The sheer number of choices is overwhelming. Your rider gets stuck. This brings us to the second surprise about change. What looks like resistance is often a lack of clarity. So to make a change, the first thing you have to do is provide crystal clear direction. The Heath brothers offer 3 powerful ways to do this. The first strategy is to find the bright spots. In any situation, no matter how bad it seems, something is working. Your job is to find that something and clone it. Consider the incredible story of Jerry Sternin. In 1990, he was sent to Vietnam to fight malnutrition in rural villages. He had 6 months, a tiny budget, and a huge problem. The experts all said malnutrition was caused by a web of huge issues: poverty, poor sanitation, lack of clean water. Fixing those things would take decades. Sternin called this analysis true but useless. Instead of focusing on the problem, he asked a simple, brilliant question: are there any very, very poor children in this village who are perfectly healthy? The village mothers thought about it and they said, yes, there are. Sternen's strategy was to find these bright spots and figure out what they were doing differently. He discovered that the mothers of the healthy children were doing a few small, almost invisible things. They were feeding their kids 4 smaller meals a day instead of 2 big ones, because tiny, malnourished stomachs couldn't handle large meals. And they were adding tiny shrimp and crabs from the rice paddies, along with sweet potato greens, into their children's rice. The rest of the village thought these foods were inappropriate or low class for children, but they were adding precious protein and vitamins to their diet. These weren't solutions from an outside expert. They were local, sustainable, and already working. Sternen then set up cooking classes, where mothers of malnourished children learned these bright spot practices from their own neighbors. 6 months later, 65% of the children were better nourished. The change had stuck, and it eventually spread to help 2.2 million people in Vietnam. Sternen's genius was to stop analyzing the problem and start looking for the solution. He asked the question, what's working, and how can we do more of it? This is the bright spot philosophy in a nutshell. The second strategy to direct the writer is to script the critical moves. Because ambiguity is the writer's enemy, you have to translate big, abstract goals into concrete, specific behaviors. Don't just say, be healthier. Say, next time you're in the dairy aisle, buy 1% milk instead of whole milk. This was the genius of a public health campaign in West Virginia. Researchers knew that milk was the single largest source of saturated fat in the average American's diet. In fact, a single glass of whole milk has the same amount of saturated fat as 5 strips of bacon. So they didn't launch a vague, eat healthy campaign. They ran a punchy, specific campaign focused on one single behavior: switching to 1% milk. They made the change crystal clear, and it worked. The market share for low-fat milk in their test communities more than doubled, from 18% to 41%. When you script the critical moves, you're telling the writer exactly where to go. You're eliminating the paralysis of choice. When a Brazilian railroad company was facing bankruptcy, the new CEO didn't give his team a vague mission to cut costs. He gave them 4 simple, scripted rules to guide every investment decision, like, faster is better than best, and use what you've got. This clarity allowed them to make smart, tough decisions quickly and turn the company around. The third way to direct the writer is to point to the destination. Change is easier when you know where you're going and why it's worth it. You need to paint a vivid picture of the future that is both inspiring and clear. The authors call this a destination postcard. Think of Crystal Jones, a first-grade teacher in a low-income school in Atlanta. Her students were starting the year far behind, some not even knowing the alphabet. Instead of setting a bunch of dull technical goals, she made a bold announcement on the first day of school. By the end of this year, you are all going to be third graders. To a first grader, a third grader is a god. They're bigger, smarter, cooler. This goal was incredibly motivating for her students' elephants. But it also gave their riders a clear destination. It hit them in the gut. The kids started calling themselves scholars, and by the end of the year, over 90% of them were reading at a third-grade level or higher. Sometimes the destination needs to be so clear that there's no room for excuses. This is what the authors call a black-and-white goal. In the 1990s, the oil company BP was trying to slash its exploration costs. A big part of the cost came from drilling dry holes, wells that didn't strike oil. For decades, dry holes were just considered part of the business. You played the odds. But the new head of exploration, Ian Vaughn, announced a shocking new goal: no dry holes. None. Zero. The explorers were outraged. They said it was impossible. But the goal was brilliant because it eliminated all the wiggle room. You could no longer justify a risky drilling operation by saying it had strategic value or that it would be a learning experience. The only question that mattered was, is this hole going to be dry? The new goal forced a massive shift in behavior. The explorers became more rigorous, more data-driven, and more disciplined, and the results were stunning. By 2000, BP's hit rate had tripled. So to direct the rider, you must conquer ambiguity. Find the bright spots that are already working. Script the critical moves to provide step-by-step instructions, and point to a destination that is both compelling and clear. But even with the clearest map in the world, the rider can't make the journey alone. He needs the raw power of the elephant. Part 2. Motivate the elephant. The elephant is the heart of change. It's where our energy, our passion, and our determination come from. The rider can provide the direction, but the elephant provides the drive. If the elephant isn't on board, you're not going anywhere. The problem is, the elephant is easily spooked, easily discouraged, and always looking for a quick payoff over a long-term reward. To motivate it, you can't just use logic and data. You have to connect with emotion. As the authors say, you have to find the feeling. This is where we return to the story of John Stegner and his pile of gloves. His analytical case for centralized purchasing was compelling, but it was just numbers on a page. It didn't make anyone feel anything. But when he dumped 424 gloves on the boardroom table, he created a visceral, emotional reaction. The executives didn't just think the system was broken, they felt it. This insight leads to a fundamental pattern that the authors observed in all successful changes. Most of us try to create change with a sequence of analyze, think, change. We present data, hope it changes people's thinking, and then hope that thinking changes their behavior. But successful change almost always follows a different pattern. See, feel, change. You show people a reality that hits them at an emotional level. The feeling sparks a new behavior. When software developers at Microsoft were skeptical about customer feedback on their new program, saying, "Where'd you find 6 dumb people?" the test lab manager didn't argue with them. He simply invited them to watch behind a one-way mirror as real users struggled with their software. When the developers saw the frustration on people's faces, their defensiveness vanished, replaced by empathy. They immediately started brainstorming ways to fix the problems. They saw, they felt, and they changed. But finding the feeling isn't always enough, because the journey of change can be long and intimidating. A big, hairy, audacious goal can easily spook the elephant. This is why the second strategy for motivating the elephant is to shrink the change. You need to break down the change into steps that are so small, so unintimidating, that the elephant can't help but get started. Home organization guru Marla Silly, known as the Fly Lady, has a brilliant technique for people who are overwhelmed by a messy house. It's called the 5-minute room rescue. The instructions are simple. Set a timer for 5 minutes. Go into the worst room in your house and just start cleaning. When the timer goes off, you can stop, guilt-free. The genius of this is that the elephant isn't afraid of a 5-minute task. It's the idea of cleaning the whole house that's paralyzing. But what often happens is that once you start, you keep going. The hardest part is getting started, and shrinking the change gets you over that first hurdle. This same principle can help people get out of massive debt. Financial guru Dave Ramsey advises people to use the debt snowball method. You list all your debts from smallest to largest, regardless of the interest rate, and you pour every extra dollar into paying off the smallest one first. Now, mathematically, this makes no sense. You should pay off your highest interest debt first. But Ramsey knows that getting out of debt isn't a math problem. It's a behavior problem. When you pay off that first small debt, you get a quick, motivating win. You feel a sense of progress. It lights a fire under you, and that momentum snowballs as you move on to the next debt. You're shrinking the change to create hope. Another way to shrink the change is to make people feel like they're already closer to the finish line. Researchers did a study at a car wash. Some customers were given a loyalty card that required 8 stamps to get a free wash. Others were given a 10-stamp card that came with 2 stamps already filled in. Both groups needed to buy 8 more car washes. But the group that started with 2 stamps was almost twice as likely to complete the card. That feeling of being part of the way there was incredibly motivating. This is exactly what happened with a group of hotel maids. They worked physically demanding jobs, but didn't think of their work as exercise. When researchers simply informed one group of maids that their daily work was, in fact, great exercise, something amazing happened. 4 weeks later, that group had lost an average of nearly 2 pounds, while a control group had lost nothing. They hadn't changed their diets or started exercising outside of work. What changed was their perception. They realized they weren't starting from scratch. They were already well on their way to being healthy. That realization motivated them to put a little extra effort into their daily tasks, and the results followed. The final way to motivate the elephant is to grow your people. Sometimes, instead of shrinking the change, you need to make people feel bigger, more capable, and more determined to tackle it. This often comes down to identity. When we make decisions, we often don't do a cost-benefit analysis. Instead, we ask ourselves questions like, who am I? What kind of situation is this? And what does a person like me do in this situation? If a change effort violates someone's identity, it's doomed. But if you can make the change a matter of identity, it can become incredibly powerful. On the Caribbean island of St. Lucia, the native parrot was on the brink of extinction, with only about 100 birds left. A young college graduate named Paul Butler was hired to save it. He knew he couldn't make a purely logical or economic case for saving the parrot, so he made it a matter of national pride. He launched a campaign with a simple, powerful message. This parrot is ours. Nobody has this but us. We need to cherish it. He created puppet shows, T-shirts, bumper stickers, and even convinced a local band to write songs about the parrot. He made the St. Lucia parrot a symbol of national identity, and the people of St. Lucia responded. They started to see themselves as the kind of people who protect their own. Poaching stopped, a sanctuary was created, and the parrot population roared back to life. Butler didn't shrink the change, he grew the people. Growing your people also means instilling what Stanford psychologist Carol Dweck calls a growth mindset. People with a fixed mindset believe their abilities are static. You're either smart or you're not. You're either good at something or you're not. When they fail, they see it as a verdict on their abilities, and they get discouraged. People with a growth mindset believe that abilities can be developed. Like a muscle, they see failure not as a verdict, but as an opportunity to learn and get better. They embrace challenges and persist through setbacks. The incredible news is that the growth mindset can be taught. Dweck ran a study with 7th grade math students who were struggling. She taught one group that the brain is like a muscle, that with effort they could get smarter. The results were astonishing. While a control group's grades continued to slide, the students taught the growth mindset saw their grades improve significantly. One boy, with tears in his eyes, asked, "You mean I don't have to be dumb?" When you lead a change, you have to expect failure along the way. Everything can look like a failure in the middle. By fostering a growth mindset, you reframe failure as learning. You tell your team, we will struggle, we will fail, but we will get better, and we will succeed in the end. Molly Howard, the principal of a high school that had the lowest test scores in Tennessee, did just that. She abolished the traditional grading system of A, B, C, D, and F. At her school, the only grades were A, B, C, and not yet. A student couldn't just fail and move on. They had to keep working until they cleared the bar. She was telling them, I believe you can do this, and I won't give up on you. It was a profound expression of the growth mindset, and it helped turn the school around. So to motivate the elephant, you need to connect with emotion. Find the feeling, don't just present the facts. Shrink the change to make the first steps feel easy and build momentum. And grow your people by appealing to their identity and instilling a growth mindset that turns failure into a stepping stone for success. But even with a clear-eyed rider and a motivated elephant, the journey can still be treacherous if the path itself is full of obstacles. Part 3. Shape the path. Imagine you're at the movies. You're given a free medium-sized bucket of stale, squeaky popcorn. You eat some of it. Now imagine the same scenario, but this time you're given a large bucket. The popcorn is just as terrible. How much do you eat? When researchers ran this experiment, they found that people with the large buckets ate 53% more popcorn. If you just looked at the data without knowing about the bucket sizes, you might conclude that some people are just big gluttons. But you'd be wrong. The situation, the size of the bucket, had a massive impact on their behavior. This brings us to the third surprise about change. What looks like a people problem is often a situation problem. We have a deep-seated tendency to attribute people's behavior to their character rather than to the situation they're in. Psychologists call this the fundamental attribution error. When someone cuts us off in traffic, we think, what a jerk. We don't think, I wonder if he's rushing to the hospital. We blame the person, not the situation. But if you want to make change happen, you have to stop blaming the person and start looking at the path. A good change leader doesn't ask, why are these people acting this way? They ask, how can I set up a situation that brings out the best in them? The first strategy for shaping the path is to tweak the environment. Often, small changes to the environment can lead to big changes in behavior. Think of Amazon's one-click ordering. By removing a tiny bit of friction from the buying process, they've generated billions in sales. When nurses at a hospital were making too many medication errors, a manager named Becky Richards realized the problem wasn't that the nurses were careless, it was that they were constantly being distracted. Her solution? She had the nurses wear a bright, ugly neon yellow vest whenever they were administering medication. The vest was a clear signal to everyone else. Leave me alone. I'm doing something important. The nurses hated the vests at first. They felt demeaning. But errors dropped by 47%. The tweak in the environment worked, even when the people didn't like it. A high school teacher in Oregon was frustrated with a few students who were always late to his class. Punishments didn't work, so he tweaked the environment. He bought a used couch and put it at the front of the classroom. Suddenly, the couch became the coolest place to sit, and to get a spot on the couch, you had to get to class early. His problem students started showing up first every day. He didn't change the students. He changed the situation. The second strategy for shaping the path is to build habits. Habits are behavioral autopilot. They allow good behaviors to happen without taxing the rider's limited self-control. When you're trying to make a change, you need to look for ways to make the new behavior automatic. One of the most powerful ways to do this is to set what psychologists call an action trigger. An action trigger is a simple plan that specifies when and where you will perform a new behavior. It's not just, I'm going to exercise more. It's, tomorrow morning, right after I drop my daughter off at school, I will drive straight to the gym. In one study, students who were supposed to write an essay over Christmas break were far more likely to do it if they first set an action trigger, deciding in advance the exact time and place they would write it. Action triggers work by preloading a decision, so you don't have to use your precious willpower in the moment. You're passing control of your behavior over to the environment. It's like creating an instant habit. Checklists are another powerful tool for building habits. Dr. Peter Pronovost at Johns Hopkins Hospital was frustrated by the number of preventable infections caused by intravenous lines in intensive care units. So he created a simple 5-step checklist for doctors to follow, including basics like, quote, wash hands with soap. There was nothing new or revolutionary on the list. But when Michigan hospitals implemented the checklist, it saved an estimated 1,500 lives and $175 million over 18 months. Checklists automate the right behavior. They're insurance against our own forgetfulness and overconfidence. The final strategy for shaping the path is to rally the herd. Behavior is contagious. We are constantly looking to others for cues on how to act, especially in new or ambiguous situations. This is why bartenders put a few dollars in their own tip jars, and why sitcoms have laugh tracks. We follow the herd. You can use this to your advantage. A hotel found that it could increase towel reuse by 26% simply by changing the sign in the bathroom. Instead of a generic environmental appeal, the new sign said that, quote, 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 the majority of guests at the hotel reused their towels. People saw what the herd was doing, and they followed along. So if the norm is on your side, publicize it. If 80% of your team gets their reports in on time, make sure the other 20% knows they're in the minority. But what if the norm is against you? Then you have to find a way to make a new behavior contagious. In the 1980s, the concept of a designated driver didn't exist in the United States. A Harvard public health professor named Jay Winston set out to change that. He and his team worked with Hollywood writers and producers to sprinkle the designated driver concept into over 160 primetime TV shows, from Cheers to The Cosby Show. He wasn't asking for a whole episode, just 5 seconds of dialogue. By repeatedly exposing people to the idea in different contexts, he simulated a social norm. And it worked. Within a few years, designated driver was a household term, and alcohol-related traffic deaths dropped significantly. In Tanzania, health workers were trying to stop the spread of AIDS caused by sugar daddy relationships, where older men have unsafe sex with young girls. Public shaming didn't work, and the girls felt powerless. The team realized that while most Tanzanians disapproved of the behavior, they were quiet about it. So they created a fictional villain people could laugh at and mock, a pathetic, ridiculous sugar daddy named Fataki. They launched a series of radio ads where Fataki always tried and always failed to seduce young women. The campaign gave people a name for the behavior they hated, and it gave them permission to speak up. Soon, people were calling out real-life sugar daddies as Fatakis. The campaign unleashed a latent social norm and started to change the culture. And that brings our journey to a close. To change things, even when change is hard, you have to align all three forces. You must give the rider clear direction, motivate the elephant with emotion and confidence, and shape the path to make the journey as smooth as possible. When the rider, the elephant, and the path all move together, change isn't just possible. It's inevitable. When you step back and look at the framework from Switch, what's so powerful about it is its profound sense of optimism. It gives us a way to understand why change is hard, but it never leaves us there. It continuously points towards solutions. The book's central message is a direct challenge to our most common excuse: people just don't want to change. The Heath brothers argue, compellingly, that this is rarely true. What we see as resistance is often just a lack of clarity. What we see as laziness is often just mental exhaustion. And what we see as a character flaw is often just a product of the situation. This is incredibly empowering. It means that you don't have to be a charismatic CEO or a world-famous leader to make a difference. You don't need a massive budget or formal authority. You just need to be a little bit clever, a little bit more empathetic, and a lot more observant. You need to be like Jerry Sternin in Vietnam, looking for the handful of healthy kids instead of the thousands who were sick. You need to be like Becky Richards in the hospital, asking not "why are my nurses so careless," but "how can I change their environment to help them focus?" You need to be like Molly Howard, seeing a failing student not as a failure, but as someone who is just not yet. The ideas in Switch are not just for big organizational transformations, they are for you, right now, in your own life. You are both the rider and the elephant. You are the architect of your own path. So let me leave you with a few simple actions you can take right now to start making your own switch. First, find one bright spot. Think of one area in your life where you're already doing something well. Maybe you're great at getting your homework done on time, but you struggle to wake up early. What is it about your homework habit that works? Do you do it at the same time every day? Do you do it in a specific place? Find that bright spot and ask yourself, how can I clone this success for my morning routine? Second, shrink the change. Pick one habit you've been wanting to build but have been putting off. Maybe it's learning an instrument, or reading more, or exercising. Now ask yourself, what is the 5-minute version of that? Can you practice guitar for just 5 minutes? Read just 2 pages? Do 10 push-ups? Make it so ridiculously easy that your elephant can't say no, just start. And third, tweak your environment. Look around you. How can you make good behaviors easier and bad behaviors harder? If you want to drink more water, put a water bottle on your desk. If you get distracted by your phone when you're studying, leave it in another room. Don't rely on willpower. Make the path do the work for you. Change isn't an event. It's a process. It starts with a single step, but it's sustained by a pattern. By directing your rider, motivating your elephant, and shaping your path, you have everything you need to start that process. You have the pattern. The only question left is the one the authors leave us with. What will you switch? That was a summary of the book Switch: How to Change Things When Change is Hard by Chip Heath and Dan Heath. We've explored the core ideas today, but I hope you can feel that a summary is just the beginning. The real power of a book like this isn't just in the ideas, but in the stories that make those ideas come alive. We've touched on a few, but the book is filled with dozens more that will surprise you, inspire you, and stick with you long after you've finished. This summary is like looking at a map of a beautiful country. Reading the book is like taking the journey yourself. If any of the stories or ideas we talked about today sparked something in you, I encourage you to grab a copy. The link is in the description. It's an investment not just in a book, but in your own ability to create the change you want to see. Also, if you found this journey valuable, a simple click on the like button and a subscription to the channel would mean the world. It helps us reach more people and ensures you won't miss our next exploration into another life-changing book. Let's keep learning and growing together.